Die-hard Republican, and he's a great speaker, so I'm looking forward to hearing Barry get up and read the James Connolly Association Easter speech.
Thank you, Connor. Before I start, I'd just like to say what an honour it is to be invited to speak here today on such a great occasion, something that we definitely cannot let lapse, as we see what's happening over there now, where they're trying to basically dumb down the celebrations for 2016. Let it be known that people around the world will not let that happen, and I'm sure we'll be there en masse come 2016. Akaja. As we approach the centenary of the 1916 Easter Rising, we gather at this monument. As many others like us gather at similar monuments in Ireland and elsewhere. And we reflect on the efforts and sacrifices of those who have gone before us. Because of the events of that week in April, 98 years ago, Easter has become the most important date in the calendar of Irish Republicans, and Easter commemorations among the most important events. And while we cast our minds to that week, to the events preceding it and to its aftermath, we do not overlook the many heroic efforts by gallant men and women who over the centuries have made the ultimate sacrifice in the same struggle for Irish national self-determination. We stand here at the resting place of Michael Dwyer, the Wicklow Chief, of the United Irishmen of Tone and Emmet. These men inspired the men and women of 1916, and in turn they have collectively inspired the generations that have followed on from them, illustrating the continuity of our struggle from the 1970s until the present day. The Rising itself was fought on the Republican side by a number of organisations, including the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the Irish Volunteers, the Irish Citizen Army, the Hibernian Rifles, Cumann and the Fianna Éireann. Despite the apparently considerable number of groups involved, the Rising was an effort by a minority within National Ireland at the time, and their efforts were largely unpopular when they were taking place, with a change in opinion only occurring following the execution of the leaders. Connolly appropriately remarked that apostles of freedom are ever idolised when dead, but crucified when alive. The coming together of the various participants of the Rising effectively marked the foundation of the Irish Republican Army, which has, in one guise or another, engaged in numerous campaigns against the British establishment throughout the past century and into the present era. Those of us here today are well aware that ours is a noble cause with a proud history. Republicans have donned the Easter lily and have come to monuments like these, even in times when it was not popular to do so. In recent times, particularly since 2006, 10 years before the centenary, we have seen the 26 county administration feign an interest in commemorating the Rising. This is clearly being done to politically capitalise on expected nationalist sentiment in 2016. Any involvement by the Free Staters in commemorating the Rising is neither welcomed or logical. The petition of Ireland and the 6 and 26 county states exist in direct contrast to the united and independent Ireland envisaged by Republicans of the current and past centuries. Indeed, it was the Free State forces under the control of Connolly, with help from their British allies, that suppressed the Republic proclaimed in 1916 during the counter-revolution of 1922-23. Paradoxically, Fine Gael, the current incarnation of Connolly, have invited the head of the British state to stand with them in 2 years' time to sully the memory of 1916. The irony is clearly lost on the blue shirts. Equally embarrassing is the spectacle of former comrades and people who were once incorrectly considered to be revolutionaries fawning over British monarchs at state visits and banquets. The former commander of the IRA in Derry City now stands side by side with the woman who decorated the terrorists who murdered 14 of his fellow city men in 1972. But we are told these things must happen in the name of progress, that we must bow down to the traditional enemy, that the corridors of Stormont somehow lead to a united Ireland on a route that none of us are allowed to know the details. Yes, ruling by fooling is a great British act, with great Irish fools to practice on. These words of Connolly ring true today as they did when he wrote them during the Home Rule Bill a century ago. What we are left with today, following the so-called progress of the past couple of decades, is a situation where former Republicans have forsaken their previous efforts to free our country and instead now sit with the enemy, conspiring against those who could not be bought. Those who would not bend have had to endure ongoing pressure from the state in the form of continuous personal harassment and raids on their homes, assaults from a political police force, internment without trial, and in some cases without charge, licence revocation for former prisoners in an attempt to keep them silent, and much, much more. For those unfortunate enough to find themselves in prison today because of British interference in Ireland, they have to endure further torture and degradation in the forms of forced strip searches, tantamount to assault within the prison system in the 6 counties. Some prisoners have been unnecessarily and forcibly strip searched scores and even hundreds of times, despite a facility available which eliminates any and all requirements to carry out this practice. Its continued use is merely a futile attempt to break the spirit of our men and women on the inside. Over the course of the past couple of weeks, we have been made aware of one particular case in Maghaberry Prison, where Republican activist Tar McWilliams from Ardoyne in North Belfast sought medical attention over a protracted period of time due to severe chest pains he had been suffering. He described the pain as the feeling you would expect from having a heavy person stand on your chest. Following a series of stalling actions by prison administration, adequate treatment was finally arranged at an external hospital. He was of course strip searched before being moved to undergo surgery, and the surgery itself involved placing a stent in his heart, as he had actually suffered a heart attack. This goes some way to show the severity of the condition he had, and which medics in Maghaberry were either too incompetent to notice or too inconsiderate to notice. When it was brought to their attention initially, and despite all of this being known to the screws, he was, of course, once again forcibly strip searched on his return to prison. Our comrade and current political prisoner, Tarlac McConnell, who I might just add, if you go to Scruffy's later on, some of the artwork is a result of Tarlac's efforts in prison. Tarlac this week brought to light his own case in which the British state, in the form of the 6 county prison service, is blocking his transfer from Portlaoise to Maghaberry. The transfer had previously been approved, and the decision to overturn it has come at the 11th hour. However, this should not surprise any of us. It was the current Secretary of State's predecessor and fellow Tory politician who overturned the ruling of a British High Court judge to release Martin Corey. The court had ruled that the continued detention without charge or trial contravened the human rights of the Armagh man and ordered his release. This was quickly turned on its head in a clear case of politically motivated decision by a British politician. Following a lengthy campaign by Corey's supporters, he was released after 4 years interned, but conditionally upon his silence on the injustice he has endured. There are a small number of current examples in a long line of examples which illustrate that we can never expect fairness from the British state, and in return they can expect nothing from us but eternal hostility. If there is one thing Irish Republicans understand about the British, it is their tendency to shift the goalpost when it suits them to do so. The reason we highlight the cases of the likes of Tarlac, Martin and others is not only because their cases highlight the injustices inherent in British rule in Ireland, but because they are ordinary men, the same as any of us, and that now includes women as well. None of us have done any wrong, and none of us would have seen a day inside prison were it not for the British occupation of Ireland. We salute our men and women in the jails for their resolve in the face of the difficulties they endure for our shared beliefs. They're in there for us, so we must be out here for them. The similarities between the conditions of today and those which were endured by Republicans at the hands of the Free State in years gone by are strikingly similar. We are being asked to accept the status quo of partition and continued British interference in Irish affairs, and are criticised by those who oppose us for rightly refusing to do so. As Republicans, we are acutely aware that on numerous occasions throughout the 20th century, and unfortunately today, some people who were once part of our movement opted to embrace the constitutional path to achieve our shared aims. They left with good intentions to reform the existing system from within. Each time they themselves became absorbed into a system they set out to change, and part of the very thing they sought to dismantle. This particular lesson of Irish history we would do well to heed. There can be no constitutional path to a socialist republic, only to the corrupting of what were once good men and women. We last gathered at this monument in 2013, and as happens every year between Easter and Easter, we bring our minds to those Republicans who have passed away over the course of the previous 12 months. This year we remember in particular two great men who gave well over a century of combined service to the ideal of Irish independence. Both Rory O'Brady and Joe O'Neill joined the Republican movement in the early 1950s and were highly active variously in the military and political wings of the movement throughout the rest of their lives. In the case of O'Brady, he held the position of Chief of Staff of the Army on 2 occasions, as well as having led the political wing of the movement between 1970 and 1983, and again between 1987 and 2009. Joe O'Neill was a stalwart of the Republican movement both nationally and in the Northwest, and was an elected councillor in Donegal for 25 years. Our generation are the inheritors of a proud Republican tradition that has been handed down from the likes of these noble men. These men having passed the mantle from the previous generation and so on, all the way back to Tone and the United Irishmen of the 1790s. It is with this in mind we renew our own commitment to the ideal of Irish independence. What might seem unachievable to us now might very well be achieved, and hopefully sooner than we might think. We only have to look at the developments in Catalonia and Scotland, where a generation ago the prospect of independence would have appeared bleak at best. Hopefully when we gather here next year, the current entities known as Spain and Britain will no longer exist as they do today, due to the efforts of our Catalan and Scottish comrades. So desperate the fact that we as Irish Republicans find ourselves in what could be described as a low ebb at the moment, we will not be deterred from achieving our aim. Despite what appear to be tough odds stacked against us, we will not relent in our efforts. To paraphrase Pearce, who said, deeming it the proudest of all privileges to fight for freedom, to fight not in despondency, but in great joy, hoping for victory in our day, but fighting on, whether victory seem near or far. Long live the Socialist Republic. Viva la Lin. Thank you.
Gurmila.